Hi, everybody. Welcome back to the Sifting Reclaiming episode, or Reclaiming Authenticity episode number 23, is what I meant to say. I am Jonah. I'm here with my wife, Lindsay, and we are here to talk about famous Christianity. Before we do, we have episodes every 2 weeks on Monday morning at 8 a.m. They go live on Spotify and YouTube. You can just search for The Sifting on either of those platforms, and you will be able to find us. If you like us, hit like on the video, share, subscribe, comment, tell us your thoughts, all of that. And we love the discourse, and we love to engage with you guys and talk to you and have just a lot of discussion around the topic of the episode, which last week or 2 weeks ago, we had quite a lot of people talk about how the discussion on quiet Christianity was a really healthy and really meaningful thing to them. And we just appreciate all of that feedback. Nutmeg, our dog, got a lot of publicity for her jumping in the video at the last minute. So she came in and she licked my face, which I didn't expect. You're not supposed to let your dog do that. Yeah, but she did it anyway. She could not be stopped.
She bushwhacked you.
Nutmeg cannot be stopped. That's the number one rule of Nutmeg, is that she cannot be stopped. She does what she wants. Toffee will follow instructions, but Nutmeg, she doesn't. Nutmeg does what Nutmeg wants. She's in that weird phase of, she's not a puppy anymore, but she's not really a fully grown, mature dog. I don't know. People with dogs might be able to relate to this.
She's in the Velociraptor stage.
Yeah, she's in the Velociraptor stage, where she's just kind of she's a really weird animal right now, and trying to get out of her puppy stage, but not entirely grown up. It's really weird. People with dogs will be able to relate to that. But we love Nutmeg. She's gotten a lot of love after her cameo last appearance, so maybe she'll make one again someday, eventually. Toffee gets a lot of love too. She's taking a nap by our feet right now, as always. It was funny. A while back, earlier today, we were talking about Toffee's viral video on Instagram, where Lindsay took a video of her begging, and how many views did it get? I think you said it got like 1,000 likes.
I think it did get up there eventually.
Yeah, it got like 1,000 likes and something like 6,000 views in total. It may be even higher than that. But Toffee just like got famous on a video on Instagram one time. So she's famous. Nutmeg's now famous. Our dogs are spoiled rotten. They think they're queens, which we kind of treat them that way, don't we? We treat them well. I'm trying to think of stuff that we've done. Full disclosure, this is our second time recording this part. I had a blunder in our first time recording this. What happened was we began and we got 30 minutes into the episode, and we realized that our microphones were not plugged into our computer. So any audio that came through the mics, there was no audio going through the mics. There was only audio being picked up by the phone. So we decided to re-record this because that phone audio is horrendous and you don't want to have to listen to it. Trust me. And even saying this, I'm double checking to make sure the microphones are plugged in.
I'm paranoid now.
So full disclosure, this is our second time recording this. So it was a blunder. It was just a mistake. But we are back, and we're going to talk about all the information that we just talked about. So we're going to go over all that again. But it's all good. It's all right. So trying to think of... I said this during our last recording, too. What did we do this weekend? We just saw family. Saw some friends last night. We have church tomorrow. We have a Sunday night service that we're going to tomorrow night. So we have a really good weekend this weekend. And next weekend is the Super Bowl. So this episode will go live the day after, the morning after the Super Bowl, which should be a national holiday. I feel like we go into that discussion every single year around the Super Bowl. You know what I mean? We had that talk last year.
Oh, I'm rooting for the Eagles.
Tell us why you're rooting for the Eagles.
Their fan base seems like a hoot. I want to see them go crazy.
The Eagles fan base.
Light posts.
The Eagles fan base is absolutely insane. I don't mean disrespect to anyone who's an Eagles fan. I think I know one person. I've known one person in my life. I went to school with him, and he was a pretty hardcore Eagles fan. I don't know why, but I think he must have been a fan of like Michael Vick or something back in the day. But he was a pretty hardcore Eagles fan. Other than that, I don't know anybody. The whole fly Eagles fly. Kansas City is also in the Super Bowl, which we're from Southwest Ohio, so we live in Bengals Nation, and everybody was so sad when they lost that football game. We were with my mom and my stepdad, and that late hit on Patrick Mahomes that gave the Chiefs the opportunity to kick the game winner was, man, Bengals fans were weeping after that. I came into work the next morning, and you could feel in the atmosphere how heavy it is, and how heavy it was because the Bengals had been knocked out. And I mean, they played a good enough game, a well enough game to win, and to go through to the Super Bowl, but that late hit really cost them. And I think the Chiefs did play better in that game. I don't mean to pour salt in the wound to the Bengals fans who are listening.
But you do.
Lindsay tells me I need to stop doing this. Like, I have a bad habit for doing this. What is it? Like, just, I don't know how to describe it.
You're so neutral.
That's what the word you used, neutral.
Take my side.
Like, take a side and don't be neutral.
Yeah.
Yeah, I have a bad habit of being neutral. Like, we were watching the game, and the late hit happens on Mahomes. And I think I shouted out, I was like, oh man, that's it for the Bengals season. Like, that's going to send the Chiefs to the Super Bowl. Like, wow, Mahomes was so great. And he played great. Like, he was at maybe 60% healthy because of his ankle. He had an ankle injury. And still, I mean, he lit up the field and he played incredible. And I said that after the game, and Lindsay was like, you're really annoying. Like, she's like, I'm not even that invested in this, and I think that you're annoying just by saying those things. So I've had to watch my tongue a little bit. The Bible talks about your tongue being the smallest object of a ship, the rudder of a ship that determines the course of the entire journey. Yeah, I need to watch my rudder. Like, I need to make sure that I don't get carried away with that. But yeah, we have the Super Bowl next week. Should be a fantastic game. Even if you're mad about who's in the Super Bowl, Chiefs and Eagles. That fun fact, not a fun fact if you're a football fan, you know this. But if you're not, the head coach of the Chiefs formerly was a head coach of the Eagles. And so people are calling it the Andy Reid Bowl because he coached both teams. There's also a pair of brothers playing each other in the Super Bowl. Travis Kelce of the Chiefs and Jason Kelce, who is an offensive lineman for the Eagles. It's the first time a pair of brothers have ever played against each other in a Super Bowl. And they've got like this iconic mom, this legendary mom who supports both the teams. And I saw this today. This is crazy. At the Super Bowl, the person who does the coin toss is typically either a referee, or I've seen them have like a Hall of Fame player come and do the coin toss. Somebody really well known in the NFL and NFL lore and history. And typically a ref or a NFL legend comes and does the coin toss. I saw today that there's a petition with 100,000 signatures for Travis and Jason Kelsey's mom to come and do the coin toss. That would be absolutely amazing to see that. To see like a jersey that's half Chiefs, half Eagles, and her to do the coin toss. Obviously, by the time this episode goes up, we'll know how the Super Bowl went and who won the Super Bowl. But I think that's just really entertaining. So it should be an entertaining game if you're a football fan, and if you're not a football fan, you've probably been sitting here waiting for me to stop talking about it. So,
speaking of the NFL, anybody remember Tim Tebow leading into famous Christianity?
Oh my gosh, Tim Tebow was something else. He was quite a mediocre player, if I'm being honest.
But he was a famous Christian.
But he was a famous Christian. Lindsay's like giving me the sign here that we need to move on. So, yeah. Today we're talking about famous Christianity, which kind of goes hand in hand with what we were talking about last episode, which is quiet Christianity, where we talked about introversion, where we talked about introverts and the church, what they can offer the church. How they can help build the church, why they're important to the church, and why they offer gifts that extroverts don't. And there's nothing wrong with being extroverted at all. Nothing wrong. But there is something wrong with shunning introverts, which we feel has happened to some degree. But today we are kind of going in a similar sort of direction. We don't want to talk about quiet Christianity today. We want to talk about famous Christianity today. Jesus says in Mark 8:36, he says, "For what shall it profit a man if he gains the whole world and loses his soul?" So I said this in the previous recording. There's obviously the whole gospel is important. Obviously the whole Bible is important to understanding the Christian faith. However, it feels to me sometimes like there are certain verses, certain stories, and certain passages that if somebody came to me and they didn't know anything about Christianity, if they didn't know anything about what it meant to be a Christian, not to be a churchgoer, to be a Christian, there are certain verses and certain stories that I would probably point out over others to give to them as kind of like pillars as to what the Christian faith kind of rests upon. And this is one of those. What profits a man if he gains the entire world but loses his soul? And I think, well, an author that I recently heard a quote from, her name is Tish Harrison Warren. I've never actually read any of her work, so I can't attest to who she is. I don't know who she is. I don't know what she's written. But I did see this on Facebook a few days ago. This quote says, "What good is it for a person if he gains tens of thousands of followers but loses his own soul?" Which I think is a wonderful translation for our social media age that we live in. I think around 2020, when COVID first happened, something kind of occurred to me that I was starting to notice. And that was the bringing forth, I guess, of more voices within the Christian world. A lot more people were talking. A lot more people were saying things. Everybody had something to say about the coronavirus. Later that year, everybody had something to say about the racial tensions that were happening in the country at that time when George Floyd was killed. And then later in the year, still, the election happened. And everything kind of went bonkers again. And everybody had something to say about it. And everybody had something to show about it. And a lot of these voices were coming from people that were not just like beginners within the Christian faith, but they were people that are very well known in and outside of the church, people that have a lot of followers, people that have a lot of influence. People started saying things that were getting a lot of traction and were getting a lot of attention. And it made me focus, and it made me pay attention to famous Christians and the influence of famous Christians and the kind of impact that they have within the church and outside of the church. So that got me thinking a lot about the kind of influence, the kind of impact that they have, and it really made me start to think have some difficult questions that I wanted to answer, and have some difficult conversations about kind of the influence of these people. And I'm not talking about any specific person. I'm talking about a concept. You know what I mean? Like, not a person, more like an idea. More like the idea of what it means to be a Christian and to be famous. Because I think being famous is very difficult. I think that it's a lot more challenging than we may think at first. And especially trying to cultivate a Christian character, fame can be a particularly challenging obstacle sometimes in the cultivation of that. So, do you have any thoughts, Lindsay, before we... I feel bad because I've talked for 15 straight minutes. So, say something.
I think fame in Christianity is kind of funny. We're almost like our own biome in the church when it comes to who's popular and like influential. Like, a lot of who we would consider famous, say like Elevation Worship, Maverick City, you ask most people on the street, they're never going to have heard of them in their life. Oh gosh. There are like a few people who break through into the secular realm, like I would say Tim Tebow, Lauren Daigle got onto secular stations
Joel
with
Osteen.
Like one song. Yeah, Joel Osteen. Then like a lot of people would probably recognize the name Billy Graham. But I'm having trouble like really thinking of any other people that we would consider like really influential in the Christian space.
T.D. Jakes.
Yeah.
Is probably a big one. I mean, he's been on like Oprah and all that.
That kind of breakthrough into secular notoriety.
Yeah. Oh, were you finished? Did you have anything else? There are streets in Charlotte, North Carolina named after Billy Graham, like to show you the kind of influence he had outside of the church. But you're right, outside of like a handful of people, no one outside the church knows who Elevation Worship is. Like, some people do. I think I've talked to a few people that aren't regular church attenders, but they knew the song Reckless Love by Bethel. Like, there's that. Obviously, that song is wildly popular.
An example of this, we have a friend who is a giant Planet Shakers fan.
Yeah.
And he tells this story about being at the airport and running into these people who were from Melbourne, which is where the church is located. And, you know, he asked him about it. They had no idea what he was talking about. It just... famous inside the church, totally obscure to most of the world.
Yeah, that's something I think about pretty often. And one day it just kind of occurred to me. It was like, no one outside the church knows who these people are. Like, they know who Joel Osteen is because they hear all the controversies about him. And they know who Lauren Daigle is because they've probably heard her on the radio, because she's on Christian and non-Christian radio stations. But for the most part, there's a lot of people that just... There are people that are famous within the church that just are not outside of the church. And so I like that observation, how famous is kind of subjective if you're depending on the setting that you're talking. And
like, pastors are famous to their congregations.
Exactly.
Nobody else.
Exactly. Like, if you're a pastor of a local church, you can't go to the grocery store without probably seeing somebody who goes to your church or somebody who has been to your church and stops you and just says hello. Like, whether it's, hey, I've been going to the church for 45 years, or hey, I came to the church one time, I just wanted to tell you I enjoyed it, or hated it, or whatever, because you know how people can be. Yeah. So being famous is kind of, it's subjective depending on your setting. And I think it's quite difficult to have that level of fame. And I know for those of us who are not famous, quote unquote, however you define that, hearing that being famous is difficult can make us scoff sometimes, because we assume that because these people have all the money that they want and access to whatever they want, we think that it's somehow an easy life to live. I think about somebody like Tom Brady. Like, we were talking about football earlier. The footballer people are like, the non-football fans are like, please, no, don't do this again. Oh gosh, that was really obnoxious of me. I think about somebody like Tom Brady. He recently retired from the NFL a few days ago. An absolute legend. Incredible watching him play. And he'll be missed in the NFL, whether you're a fan that loved him or a fan that hated him. I remember last year he went through a very public divorce, and I kept thinking about how awful it would have been to be in his shoes during that time, because he is going through something very challenging, and he's going through something very life-altering. It's something that's probably weighing him down quite a lot. He didn't have a great last season. His stats were great. His stats were still fantastic. But the team as a whole, the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, they didn't have a great season. They got to the playoffs because their division was really bad. And that's the only reason they were even there in the first place. And they got blown out in the first game of the playoffs. So they didn't have a great season. And I have to think that, like, when your leader is going through something difficult, it's probably weighing on everybody else too. And there's something in the morale and something in the aura, I guess, that is bringing everybody down. And I kept thinking about how bad it would be to be in his shoes and to hear a whole bunch of people talking about your situation that have absolutely no idea what they're talking about. And people judging you, and people saying things about you, and calling you names, and saying that you hate your family, and that you don't care about your family. And I kept thinking about how awful that would be, to have that your life is so under a microscope. Like, a divorce is something that people will often go through privately. They're not even public about it. So he was going through something that shouldn't have even been publicized in the first place. But because he's Tom Brady, and everything he does is under a microscope, and everything that happens to him is under this microscope, it became super public, something that should never have been in the public discourse to begin with. And I often think about how awful that would be if you were in his shoes. And if you're a movie star, you can't go to a restaurant to have lunch, like, without fans crowding in on you. I saw a NFL player in a church one time, and me and my friend, we just saw him from across the lobby, and we're like, whoa, that's him. Like, it was Andy Dalton when he was the quarterback of the Bengals. And we went up to him, we said hi, we got a picture with him, and next thing you know, people are swarming around him. And I think he understands and he knows that if he goes out into public, he's going to have that kind of reception, and he's going to have that kind of attention.
Just like when you're 7 feet tall and stand out like a radio tower.
The guy was huge. Like, he was massive. Like, these NFL players, Lindsay said it the other day, they're like gladiators. Like, you have no idea how huge they are of people until you're around them. So he was hard to miss. You know, the very tall, that very red hair. So a lot of people were crowding around him. And I kept thinking to myself, I'm like, man, you can't do anything when you're famous, because everything is under a light. Everything is under this microscope. And I think that proves to be the biggest difficulty of having any sort of level of fame, no matter your setting, no matter how big or how small it is. I think that's a big factor. Do you have anything to say about that?
We'll say with, we'll call it like secular fame, or something that's very different between kind of Christian fame and secular fame. Nobody could care less what a normal famous person does with their money.
Mm-hmm.
But in the Christian sphere, you have this whole other layer of every purchase being scrutinized because it's church money.
Yeah.
Like, I don't know how many times I've heard about the T.D. Jakes buying his wife a car.
Oh, that was John Gray who did that.
That was John Gray?
Yeah.
Okay. Or, I mean, there was a whole, I don't remember if it was just a post or like a whole site that went up several years ago of like pictures of just different pastors wearing like expensive clothing. And it was tagged like how much each piece of clothing was.
Mm-hmm.
You know, in an effort to shame their use of church offering, and because that's where their money comes from.
Mm-hmm. What an awful thing. Like, going back to the John Gray situation. Like, he was publicly ostracized because he was a husband that bought his wife a car. He was a husband that just did something loving and did something gracious for his wife. And everybody lost their minds about it. Because, oh, it's church money, and it's that fame, and it's that rich, power, and all of this stuff. And I'm like, man, this sucks. Like, man, I would hate to be, I would hate to have that level of publicity, and for that many people to just have you under their microscope, free to judge your life however they want, even though they don't know you really at all. So,
which I don't think pastors should go nuts with.
Of course, yeah.
With the offering plate, but you get what I'm saying.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and that brings up a really interesting point. I was going to get into this later, but I think you talking about this, we can kind of get into it now. When you see like famous people, famous preachers or worship leaders on TV, I mean people that are known by the world outside of the church, non-Christians, the unchurched population. When they see somebody like Joel Osteen on TV, or Hillsong is another great example. When they see something like the Hillsong scandals that unfortunately happened in that community, when they see these sorts of things, and they see people messing up and people doing wrong things, in a very public way, it really affects the reputation of the church, I think. Because I think the unchurched population, when they think of church, I think they're thinking of Joel Osteen and Hillsong and T.D. Jakes. They're thinking of these really big figures that we know in the church and that they know for being influential outside of the church. So they think of these people. I think C.S. Lewis is probably somebody who falls into that category too. And
John, I'm sorry to report that he's no longer with us.
Well, yes, of course, he's passed away now. Never mind. I wasn't.
His day-to-day actions are not judged.
Okay, forget I said that. It was a different time when he was alive anyway. So, okay, forget I said that. But when I think that when they see something happening with Joel Osteen, or they see something happening with Hillsong, there tends to be a what's the word I'm looking for? A generalization that the entire church is like this. And so their image of the church is based off of what they see these really famous, really popular figures doing. And that should raise a discussion within the church about the kind of image that we're projecting out to people and the kind of image we want to project outside of the church walls. What does the church want to be known by? Does it want to be known by its fame? Known by its money? I remember the whole thing happened a while back of Jesse Duplantis and the jet that he bought, and that was a whole ordeal. And people said, "Well, a preacher doesn't need a jet," and why in the world is he spending money on a jet? And you can think however you want about that, but the question still arises of what is the image that we want to put out to the rest of the world. And how can Christians within influential circles, whether that be influence locally, influence on a state level, influence on a national level, work to improve that reputation among people that are unchurched, people that we want to bring in, people that we want to join us, people that we want to be in the family of God and to experience the presence and the power of the Holy Spirit that works in their life. What kind of image are we portraying? So, yeah, that's kind of my general thoughts. Anything that I talked about that you want to elaborate on?
I think this episode was a little my idea. I think well, I kind of brought this to you and was like, "Hey, maybe we could do this," and it's because of kind of the news of Kanye West losing his mind recently, which he's I forgot
about Kanye.
He's a very interesting case because he was already wildly famous and then got saved. And he he pretty quickly released that Christian album, which I don't feel one way or the other about. Mm-hmm. But yeah, and it was big news for the church. And he was pretty immediately leading worship at a large church. And it almost feels like he was so famous that he got absolutely no guidance of what this walk is supposed to look like. And now, gosh, what talk show was he on? The crazy guy.
Oh, I forget.
Alex Jones.
Oh, yeah. Okay.
He was on Alex Jones. And this dude was looking at Kanye West like he was out of his mind. And it's almost like the secular world thinks that this insanity that he is portraying is due to his salvation. Because he had such a platform and it doesn't seem like he was guided at all on how to use it for good. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I forgot about Kanye, that whole situation. How'd that song go? You my Chick-fil-A.
Closed on Sunday.
Closed on Sunday. You my Chick-fil-A. Okay, I'll stop rapping. Oh my gosh, I forgot about that. Yeah, that was one of the craziest things I think I've ever seen. This guy, this rapper who's not known to have any sort of influence within the church at all, just kind of comes in, and all of a sudden he has it, and all of a sudden he's leading worship. I don't even know what Kanye West is doing anymore, but I don't think he's involved with like church at all. At least I think. I could be wrong.
I I don't pay that much attention to like popular media, but I feel like there's kind of a war between him and Kim Kardashian of like he wants his
Oh,
kids to come to church with him.
mm,
And that's a big thing. But like the whole point of bringing him up is like how great that could have been for someone with already such a large platform to get saved, and it really turn their life around for the good. Like, but it kind of seems like he got saved and just went bonkers from there, which is unfortunate.
yeah. For the record, like, we don't know any of these people,
Yeah.
and they don't listen to our podcast. I promise. Like, they don't listen to us. And we're not trying to. I just want to make this clear because we've mentioned a lot of names of a lot of people, and we're not trying to say anything negative or positive about them at all. We want to use examples of what we've seen publicly because of their fame and how it can lead the church to kind of handle this issue and this subject better. I don't think fame is entirely a bad thing. Obviously, Jesus was the most famous person of all. When you think about the woman with the issue of blood, we read that story and we read about her pushing through the crowds to get to Jesus. She pushed through crowds to get to Jesus, meaning that he was just walking around and people were thronging upon him. Crowds of people were moving in, and they were closing in on him, trying to get his attention, trying to get him to do something for them. And this woman had to fight through crowds of people to get to Jesus, and think that was probably what his everyday life was like. Jesus did one of his teachings. I forget off the top of my head which one it was, but he did one of his teachings from a boat in the middle of the sea, because there were people all over the coast and all over the beach, and he took the boat back out to sea, so that this is what I've heard, and historians will tell it like this: the reason he did that is so that his voice could have been projected enough to reach all of the people so that they would be able to hear him. Obviously, they didn't have fancy mics, so he just had to use his natural acoustics. But there were people constantly coming to see him. When Jesus feeds the 5,000 with 2 fish and 5 loaves of bread, there were 5,000 people there. There were 5,000 people looking to him.
That's just the men.
And that's just the men, right? They were probably double or more, considering the women or children that were there too. So we think about Jesus as the most famous person that's ever lived. But yet it didn't affect him the way that it affects most of us. The popularity and the fame. Now, we live in a social media age, and I think that has something to do with it. We could get into that even. But the main thing is that I think Jesus wasn't affected by it because his identity was never rooted in what he did. It was never rooted in his miracles. His identity was never rooted in what people thought about him, what people were saying about him. Obviously, he was well known within the Jewish circle and the Roman circle for different reasons. There were people that were very for him, and there were people that were very opposed to him in both of those arenas. But Jesus' identity was never founded in any of that. Jesus' identity, if we look back to the moment he was baptized, and he comes out of the water, and the heavens open, and the dove descends upon him, and the Father says, "This is my Son, whom with I am well pleased." And that's what Jesus' identity was founded in. It was founded in his Father, not anything else. And I think, could it be that part of the 40 days in the wilderness was Jesus strengthening himself in that identity? Because he gets that moment of very firm identity, and then he goes out and he's alone with nothing to eat for 40 days, being tempted by Satan. And I think that moment and in that time, it just strengthened his identity more and more, so that he wouldn't be fazed and he wouldn't be moved by, and he wouldn't be tempted by putting his identity in all of the things that he did. So obviously fame didn't get to Jesus, and it didn't get the worst of him, and it was still used for good. So I don't think being famous is bad. I think we see a lot of bad examples, and those examples get magnified. I don't know. Do you have any thoughts?
I think with social media and in, I want to say it's like the last 20 years, the amount of ministerial staff who are paid to do what they do has absolutely exploded.
Mm-hmm.
Like, it used to be that your preacher was coming from his office job to the church. Mm-hmm. He was receiving no monetary support, essentially. And with social media, getting monetary support from social media, getting your entire salary coming from the church and your congregation, there's a push for that notoriety to like do something that's going to get you noticed above everybody else. Mm. And saying what your fan base wants to hear. Because if they don't like what you're saying, you're going to be losing money. Mm-hmm. Essentially, it translates to your lifeline. Mm-hmm. And that can be extremely dangerous, I think. Like, only saying what you know people are going to like. Always pushing to be noticed. Like, always looking for a bigger hit of dopamine from getting more subscribers, more likes. Because that means more money, more influence. Yeah, it's not even that I know that has exploded with the internet and just people who make their livelihood being preachers, being worship leaders, being social media influencers, Christian YouTubers. It's really affected.
Mm-hmm. Could we talk about social media for a second? Because that's come up a couple times, and I'd like to talk about how social media changes this type of discussion, and how it changes our viewpoint. I'm somebody that I might be a little old school in thinking like this, but I don't think your life needs to be on social media. There are some people that it's like they post everything about themselves on social media. Every meal they have, everything they do on every evening. And I'm like, this is not good. Everybody does not need to know everything about you. And do you feel like do you I'm trying to think of the right way to phrase this question. Bear with me. Be patient with me. Do you feel like that even more so goes for people that are in ministry? Like, do you feel like social media can be used against them in a way? I don't know if this question makes sense. Am I making sense with saying that?
Yeah, I think I know what you mean. Like, when people post their every thought on social media, when they can't get to the point where they can't control themselves from like bleeding on social media. And when I definitely don't push out to social media, even this podcast, every thought I have, because you don't want people to know your every thought. And it's almost like the more you put out, the more different people you're gonna offend ultimately with. Yeah, if you bleed everything without thinking it through, that will have a negative effect on you, yes.
Yeah. One of the things that I think about a lot, and I know this because I've been there, is when you're somebody that has influence in the church and you know that you have influence, whether you have a position or not, there's a really significant temptation to start chasing affirmation within your legitimacy. And what I mean by that is sometimes I see people, and again, I only say this because I've been there and I know what this feels like. Sometimes I will see people that have no position whatsoever. They'll post their thoughts and they'll post their scriptures and they'll post this and that. And part of me thinks, because I've been there, I think a lot of this is just out of wanting likes, and it's just out of like wanting affirmation, and it's just out of wanting somebody to pay attention to me and somebody to pay attention to what I'm saying, because I have something valuable to say and because I have something valuable to offer. And I just want people to, I just want to put it out there, and I want to get likes and I want to get comments because I want to be affirmed in that. And I know how that feels, and I know the temptation for that. And a lot of that is rooted in not having our identity firmly within the Lord. Instead, our identity is in what people think about us and how people perceive us and in how people view us. And just me personally, like I used to do that thing, and I stopped because I'm just like, nobody cares. Like I'm not somebody that really has the position and somebody that has the authority to be putting that kind of influence out there. And I noticed that I was doing it because I was wanting somebody to affirm me, not feeling confident that the Lord affirms me and I'm accepted by him and I'm loved by him. And that is a truth, and that is a doctrine that I really feel the people in ministry desperately need to grasp hold of, because when you're not firmly rooted in that, you seek out fame and you seek out influence over people. And there's nothing wrong with having influence. There's nothing wrong with fame, but I think you tend to seek out your affirmation in other things. And I think that's...
You go fishing.
Exactly. Yeah. Listen, I'm not a pastor. I'm not a preacher. I don't know anything about this. This is just what I see from the outside, and thinking about it and thinking about my experiences. Just these are just my thoughts about it. It almost seems like if I could get more money, or if I could get more followers, or if I could get more attention or likes or shares, that makes me feel affirmed in what I'm doing, instead of I feel affirmed because God loves me and because I'm his son, I'm his daughter, and I'm perfectly accepted by him, and he's transformed me and he's saved me and he loves me. And I think that is the disposition that more people need to take. I don't know. Do you have any thoughts about that? I know we're running out of time, but I want to get your takes. Give me your takes.
Yeah, I think it is dangerous on any level of influence, whether you're just well liked at your church, or if you are a famous pastor, to always be looking for affirmation from those people that you have the influence over.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah. I think there's somebody that I really enjoy. His name is Casey Doss. He's a preacher and a pastor. Well, he's not a pastor anymore, but he still preaches and he still does different things. One of the things that he always posts wonderful insights on Facebook and Instagram from time to time. And one of the things he said one day was, we have a faith that doesn't celebrate celebrities. It celebrates martyrs. And that has always really stuck out to me. Because the Christian faith is about celebrating the people who are overlooked, and the people that they didn't have all the power, and they didn't have all the influence, and they didn't have all the followers, but they were just simply faithful to God, and they were faithful within their Christian faith. And the world outside of Christianity celebrates celebrities, but the Christian world looks at people who are overlooked a very different way, because God looks at them and he exalts the humble, the Bible says. So it's a faith that celebrates people that are overlooked, people that aren't famous, people that don't have the power, people that don't have the influence. And I think the lesson in that is that we can put our faith in that, and we can put our affirmation in that, but it will fail us every time. And we'll find ourselves lost again. And we'll find ourselves confused again. We'll find ourselves broken again in some way. And until we get the lesson, and we learn that our affirmation is in God alone, that it's in Christ alone that we are loved, and that we have our identity, and that we have our affirmations, I think we start to live from a very healthy place, because we realize no matter if I have 5 followers or 50 million followers, my status before God has not changed. He still views me as his son. He still views me as his daughter. And no amount of fame, no amount of wealth, no amount of power or influence or whatever is going to influence me in that, and it's going to move me away from that place. So yeah, I think that's the biggest lesson. Is it comes down to identity, and it comes down to placing ourselves firmly within the world of God's love and the world of God's acceptance of us, instead of placing ourselves in a place where wealth determines our value, and where influence determines our value, and where followers determine our value. Any closing thoughts?
I would say, when you mentioned, like, for a second earlier, like the Hillsong scandal, and when it comes to these, these famous Christian scandals, whether it's on such a high level of influence like Hillsong, or whether it's down at your pastor has a moral failing. I think if that moral failing, like, breaks your faith in God, your faith wasn't ever really in God. It was in that image of what a Christian looks like. And we listened to a podcast with Tim Keller here recently. Mm-hmm. And he discussed, like, kind of the line between, when these things happen, the line between forgiveness and accountability. And I think a lot of times we have made these influential people accountable for our entire faith, rather than they're only accountable for their walk. And whoever is watching them are accountable for theirs. Do we think that they should be able to do these things and go right back into their ministry? No, we do not. We think that they should definitely take a step back, because they have broken their trust with people who looked up to them and trusted them. But should they never be able to, do anything for God again? No. But their walk should not determine your faith. You can't let influence of, like, a famous Christian get to that level in your life.
Mm-hmm. It's beautifully said. Yeah. Always keeping the right perspective on other people, realizing that they're people at the end of the day. They're just people like you and me. Lord, we thank you for this time today. Lord, I pray for every person listening to it, whatever they're going through in life, whatever they're facing, whatever they're struggling with, whatever is challenging them. I pray, Lord, that you would come in and show yourself powerful to them. Show them that you love them. Surround them with people and community that will help them. And I pray that for the people listening to this today who are trying to wrestle with this issue also, that by your grace and by the movement of your Spirit, you would help them. And that this would provide some sort of, maybe not all the answers for them, but something to think about and something to ponder. We thank you, Lord, and we praise you and pray for every person who listens to this podcast. In Jesus' name, amen. Amen. Guys, thank you so much for watching. We'll be back in a couple more weeks. Stay tuned for a lot more of The Sifting. Thanks, guys, for watching. Have a great few weeks.